Hi, I'm Kristen, and this is Scrap Fabric Love. And today I'm telling you the story of my leopard print quilt. It's not actually what I called the quilt, but that's what it is. I'll show you a bigger picture of it in a minute as I go through the process of making it. All right, so I've got timestamps in the description of the video if you just want to get straight to how I made it. But I do want to kind of spend a minute talking about the why and the sort of thinking behind it that I had to do, just kind of because I had to fill out the artist statement for the show that I was submitting it to. So this is actually a quilt I made in the middle of last year, specifically for the sustainable category in the Festival of Quilts quilt show in Birmingham, England. So the sustainable category was all about using sustainable materials, reclaimed materials, secondhand, all that kind of stuff. So that's what this is made of, and I'll go through that in the video, what everything is. But why did I want to do leopard print? Well, I really like leopard print, for one thing. I mean, to be just silly about it, you know, it's been a trend, I guess. As I have it in my coffee mug. I have it on my leggings today. I don't know if you can see them. So I do just like a leopard print. I also really, if you follow the channel, you'll see I like to pair bright colors and old denim. It's just a thing. I don't really know why. So that was kind of the genesis of it. And then obviously, because you're submitting it to a quilt show, you begin to think, I need to be a bit more arty about this. I don't really, this is going to annoy some people, but I don't really consider myself a quilt artist. I'm just a quilter, a confident beginner quilter. I've only been quilting since COVID, and I just enjoy trying things. So I do find it hard to kind of write those artist statements and things like that. But I did, you know, doing these quilts for the sustainable category, which I've done for 2 years now, does start to get me thinking, especially as a quilter, about just the abundance of stuff in my sewing room. I mean, we all probably have too big a quilting stash. Even though I try to buy mine secondhand, I like from other quilters, I don't always, you know, and there are other areas of my life where sustainability probably is not top of mind. So for example, if you came around my house and saw all of the plastic toys, I want to use another word there, that my kids have, and how many they break and end up in the rubbish, it's ridiculous. So I can't pretend to be anyone's eco warrior on any level, really. I do my best. I'm trying to make small changes here and there, but yeah, nobody's perfect. I don't think any of us are. And that was kind of the theme that I went with for this. So the quilt is called, Can We Change Our Spots? And everybody knows that saying, can a leopard change its spots? Or a leopard can't change its spots, whatever the saying is. Anyway, and so that was kind of the idea, because all of the spots and things are, well, they're bright and happy, like you might buy in a kind of fast fashion context. It's all made of upcycled, recycled materials. But it's a genuine question, because it's really hard in the society that we live in to not want to consume more. So even though you'll hear me on the videos going, oh, I buy this secondhand, or I buy other people's scraps, or I'm using reclaimed batting, or whatever it is, I'm using too much of it. I'm buying too much of it. I can go to a charity shop and buy a bunch of stuff that I don't know what I'm going to use it for. It just seems like a good idea. I can go on eBay or Vinted or Gumtree, which are kind of various secondhand apps in the UK where I live, and kind of just buy too much because it is secondhand, because it is cheap. And like, maybe there's an argument, oh, maybe that's okay because it's circular, because the stuff I don't use, I'll pass on, but it's still too much. But I still want it. So I don't think I'm that different to other people with that there's just this feeling that we've been given by media and our parents and whoever, that it's just more stuff is good, and it's hard to not want it. You know, I can want to not want it, but I still want it, you know? So that was kind of the idea behind the theme of the quilt. So I hope that doesn't make me sound really shallow, but anyway, that was the idea. So, and at the risk of annoying folk who are genuine eco warriors, who really live this stuff, and I totally respect you and admire you, I do think there's a lot more of us in this camp where we feel guilty kind of all the time about things that we're doing, but it's so hard to not. And I just don't know what the answer is, because there's a risk to kind of go, I'm going to go all or nothing, as in all sustainable, all secondhand, I'm got this top of mind my entire life all the time, or I'm just going to ignore it. And I think if we make people feel too bad about not being able to go all in, then they won't make the small changes that, you know, collectively could make some bit of a difference. I know it won't solve the problem. I get it. I understand. So there's this whole, it's hard. But so I am kind of in the camp of, I don't want to make anyone feel guilty. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty at all. But I do want to kind of encourage people to think about making small swaps, small changes that they can make that aren't, and trying to make them feel not as hard. So when I talk about some of the secondhand materials that I might use in some of my other videos, that's all I'm trying to do, is kind of normalize, let's just buy it secondhand, which plenty of you already do. So I'm preaching to the converted. But anyways, but I don't want anyone to feel guilty about what it is that they do, because I don't think that will help anyone make any good choices going forward. It just makes people tune out of any messages of being more sustainable, because it all just feels like a stick over their head. So which is not what we want. So anyway, so that is the genuine question behind the quilt. So enough of my soapbox. Let's get on to how I made the quilt. I started off by piecing light colored denim into a roughly quilt shaped background piece. I'm kind of a collector of all my friends and family's old jeans, so I had plenty. And then what I was trying to do here, not that super successfully, was like draw a circle kind of roughly in the middle. So I'm doing the thing where you tie a bit of string to a can and kind of move it around. And I was trying to use like a chalk pencil, and it was really hard to get the marks to even show up on the denim. Anyway, I got a rough idea anyhow of where the middle of the quilt was, and that was where I wanted to put the leopard spots, in the middle. And at this point, my plan was to quilt up the background fabric first and add the leopard prints second. So I used an old candy stripe kind of flannel sheet as the batting, and some IKEA curtains as the backing fabric. So I had 4 of these super long faux velvet IKEA curtains, and I've been using them up in quilt backs. I still have 1 panel left, but anyway, I used 2 of them in this backing. So I collected all sorts of really brightly colored fabric scraps, but not like quilting fabric. So like faux velvet, corduroy, proper velvet, I think, from like cushion covers and fabric remnants that I found mostly in charity shops, sometimes on eBay. And the idea was, I was thinking I could fuse them in place on the long arm itself. Okay, so I didn't take a picture of where I got to. I had it on the long arm, did a whole bunch of straight line stitching, which I have unpicked. Can you see the remnants of the thread? The idea was, because I've had this problem with denim stretching on the long arm before, I thought, oh, well, I'll quilt it down first, and then I'll put on my leopard print thing. This is what the quilt's all about, this. Anyway, and then when I got to about here, it started to pucker. I was cutting bits. And then I said, well, I'll just see what the leopard print thing looks like. And if I hate it, I can just abandon the whole thing. But I put it on and I did like it. But then I decided I didn't like the quilting and the puckering. So I spent all last night unpicking all the quilting lines and unquilting the couching I'd already done around these ones, which was the worst for unpicking. And now the plan is I'm going to put all the leopard print down first, and then somehow get it loaded on the long arm more like you would a quilting frame for hand quilting. It's not going to hand quilt, but I'll like try and somehow roll it and start in the middle, the same way I would if I was doing it on a domestic. I think that's my problem with the denim. I'm hoping that I try and do it like a regular quilt, starting from the top and going down, and then everything just gets stretched. But if I was going to do it on a domestic, I would start in the middle and work out. So maybe I should see if I can do that in the long arm. But anyway, I got to get this leopard print down first, because that's the whole point of the whole thing. So let's see how we go. So I was on the floor in my sewing room listening to a whole lot of podcasts and making a great big mess with all of this. I was cutting out basically each leopard spot, the colored bit and the black bit, one at a time. So the black is an old sheet that I was cutting up, and I was kind of fusing it down. That's the bit that's not super sustainable, because I was using fusible. and just sort of growing it. I knew I wanted the leopard prints to make their own spot, in the middle, like a round circle. So it was a little bit of a challenge to figure out when I was done. And then the other thing I was trying to do was to sort of have a good distribution of the colors. So all of that took a little bit of thinking time, but in the end, I managed to decide I was done with the circle. Right, so here it is loaded up on the long arm. I basted it at the very top and then I'm rolling it up. So I always have this issue on the long arm with the stretch because I don't use interfacing even on my stretch denim and all I just create problems for myself anyway. And obviously it's getting stretched on the frame of the long arm. So anyway, it tends to go squiff. So if I was doing it on a domestic, I would start in the middle and work out. And so that's what I'm going to try and do on the long arm. So I've rolled it kind of halfway up and I'm going to quilt down the leopard spots. I'm actually going to couch around them with some black yarn. That's the idea. And I'm going to start with like the middle strip and then go this way and then a bit that way and then go out to the edges. Kind of, that's the idea. I'm hoping that will give me less pucker problems. So we'll see how that goes. So I found some black chunky yarn at a charity shop here in the UK. It's pretty much the same thing as a thrift shop if you're in North America. And I decided to use it to kind of couch and applique the leopard spots on at the same time. So what I ended up doing was cutting a kind of guesstimate of the amount of yarn I needed for the sort of inner circle of the spot. And then again, for the outer circle of the spot, I'm not using a proper couching foot. I don't have one. I have considered getting one previously, but I have done other couching projects without it. Sometimes you can feed the yarn through other feet, but I find it easier just to kind of stitch over it. Probably slightly overstitched in retrospect. The yarn isn't poofy on this quilt. It's a bit heavily stitched down. And that's probably because I wasn't just couching for a decorative effect. It was also to make sure the spots stayed in place as well. So I maybe stitched a tiny bit more than I needed to. So this footage is already a bit sped up and I'm going to speed it up even more in a second because otherwise we would be here for days. This took ages. I was not quick. I didn't always break threads each time. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm kind of just traveling to the next spot that I want to do with the thread and then starting there. So I then did clip the thread eventually once I started stitching, but the bottom thread is kind of traveling across the quilt. So I had a whole lot of threads on the back to be trimming and burying and all that kind of stuff at the end. So that was a little bit of a time suck as well. So despite me saying that this took ages, which it did, this is the bit I kind of quite enjoyed when I've kind of into a groove of what I was doing. I'm just repeating the same thing over and over again. I've got my headphones in. It's all working out okay. I hadn't yet at this point come up with a feasible plan for how to sort of quilt together the 3 layers of the other bit of the denim outside of this leopard print circle in the middle. So obviously this is getting quilted as it's getting appliqued, but the rest of it wasn't. So I did have to come up with how am I going to do that plan? And I think, still originally thinking it would be something on the long arm, but I was starting to consider the idea of tying the rest of the quilt. If you haven't heard of tying, it's just where you take a bit of yarn and you basically feed it through all 3 layers and then tie a knot. So you're literally just tying the layers together in sort of even spacing kind of thing. So this is some of the brightly colored yarn that I ended up finding again at my local charity shop. So all I'm doing is buying more secondhand stuff, questioning whether I'm being sustainable at all. So traditionally when you tie a quilt, you just kind of put the yarn through all 3, tie a knot, and you end up with these tails. I didn't want the tails, so I decided to do a kind of a cross stitch. So I'll show you how I did that so that you can kind of understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so here I am. I've got this needle. Now, I think it's a tapestry needle. I'm not sure if you can see. Maybe somebody can tell me what this is called. It's got a flat edge on both sides, and then it's very pointy. So it's almost like shaped like a bit of a spear at the end. And I'm pretty sure it was part of a kit for like rugs or something, because I've got these different rug
needles. Anyway, so but it's got a big eye, so I can thread the yarn. It's just like knitting yarn, and then making a knot in one end. So I started off doing this on the long arm, but then I did eventually take it off. But I'm going to show you this stitch on the long arm so you can just kind of see what I was doing. So I want to put a stitch here. I don't know. I'm kind of doing this by eye where I think it should be, because it's a flannel sheet. It's not like batting that's going to separate. So I don't know. I was more doing it for visually and also enough to tack everything together. So anyway, I'm thinking here or here. Here-ish. Okay, so what I'm doing is just lifting up the denim, putting the needle up to where I want it, so the knot's keeping it there, and then taking off the front bar on the long arm, so everything's just like hanging off the bar that's usually for the backing fabric, so that I can reach my hand underneath, and I'm touching the back of the quilt, and I'm just making a little cross stitch, one, and then two, and I'm going all the way through all 3 layers, and then I'm going to flip this back up again. This is where it's time consuming and ridiculous, and you shouldn't be doing it, but anyway, and then I'm coming up through just the back 2, right? So the batting, or the sheet in this instance, and the backing, but not the front, and then I'm just going through one of the stitches and making a knot, sometimes 2, and then that's probably enough, but just to be sure, I'm also going, this is now just under the sheet, not through the backing, and just sort of anchoring the yarn in there, and then I'm cutting it off. So, and then I'm changing the color of the yarn for the next one. Ridiculous. Like, I know I should have multiple of these I don't have 2 of these needles, or a box of them, or I don't even know what they're called. So ideally you would probably have lots of different, if you were going to do different colors, which is what I want to do, you would have different needles loaded with different colored threads, or you wouldn't do different colors, and then you could just travel your yarn underneath, right? And then you don't have to do all of this. So this is why this is a ridiculous method. But anyways, we are where we are. So I'm going to now take this off of the frame and lay it on the floor and see if I can get this finished, because it is now the 3rd of July and I need the final photo by the 15th, and then it needs to get sent off, and I'm still have to work on the quilt with Tom. So so I shouldn't be doing this. I should have stuck with the original one of quilting it with the machine first. But anyway, I do really like the way these little pops of color look. So anyway, I'm going to continue with this on the floor. So this is me doing those individual cross stitches to sort of tack the quilt together. I did eventually make it go a tiny bit faster by cutting the cuts of yarn a little bit longer and then just moving around the quilt. So you see me moving to different corners, so that, like, say if I had some pink yarn on the thread, I'm not putting a bunch of pink stitches next to each other in one corner. I'm kind of putting a pink stitch in each section, if that makes sense. Anyway, it still took a while. And I don't know if any of you saw my video from last week about the 10 quilting rules I don't follow. And in it, I was talking about how I like to figure things out for myself. So even though this isn't the most efficient way, I still kind of enjoyed trying it. And you'll see also on this one side, I'm lifting the flap where I'd kind of cut the denim. So that was me cutting the denim way, way back at the beginning on the long arm when I was trying to make it lay flat with the regular quilting stitches, which didn't work. Now, I could have obviously pieced that back together on a machine. I didn't do that. What I ended up doing was repairing it with some yarn in this kind of cross stitch way. And that was me figuring out what to do as I went along. Was it a mistake? Yes, maybe, but I actually like that bit of the quilt. I don't know why I do, but I do. So that's kind of the happy accidents of kind of figuring it out, learning as you go, that I really like about quilting. This was the messy back that I had to clean up the threads that I'd mentioned earlier. And then I bound the whole thing with the same black sheet that I'd been cutting the leopard prints out of. And here is my quilt hanging up at the Festival of Quilts in the Sustainable Quilts category, hanging right next to Russell Barrett's quilt. He won the category last year, so that was a bit of an honor for my little quilt. And here's me standing in front of my quilt for a second photo, because the first photo that I got taken by a subscriber who kind of said hi, I realized after the fact I was holding a Starbucks cup, as if to just like purposely, ironically highlight my hypocrisy in the sustainable quilts category. So we will pretend that this was some sort of artistic statement in order to illustrate the struggle that I was talking about at the top of this video, about all of us just trying to do our best and living in the world we live and finding that all just a little bit difficult. So fast forwarding to this year, 2025, the Scottish Quilt Show has a theme, the 3 R's that they are looking for quilt entries for. So again, about recycling, reuse, and all of that. And so I have decided to enter this quilt into that themed category as well. So if you are in Glasgow, you can see it there in March.
So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you happen to be in Glasgow this March, it will be at the Scottish Quilting Show, as will I, and I'd love to see you there. Drop me a note if you're going to be there and maybe we can meet up. Next week, I've got big exciting news about a quilting social group that I'm going to be starting. So stay tuned next week for that, and I hope some of you can join me. Thanks so much for spending time with me. Bye.